The Sins of the Fathers by Charles Mungoshi, Zimbabwe. Everyone had gone and they were alone. Rondo Rwafa and his father, the ex-minister. Unknown to the father, the son, who had never handled a gun before, had one in the inside pocket of his jacket. By the end of the day he would shoot, or not shoot, his father. They were sitting near the dying fire under the green maku stretched out over a corner of the big yard of Rondo's house in Burdale. Metal and bamboo chairs were ranged haphazardly around the huge fire that had been kept going for almost a week now. Rondo had not been there when the accident occurred, but his mind had been repeatedly going over what he imagined could have happened that day. He could see his father-in-law, Basil Mzamani, singing his song to the two girls, the one that he had been singing earlier that day to him, Rondo. Just as he had joined in the company, the old man, Mutukuzi, was also one of his favorite song musicians. He could hear his children singing, Todini, Sinzeni, what shall we do? He imagined a lot of laughter in the car, the old man so involved in singing and the joy of being with his granddaughters that he forgot to pay attention to what was on the road. As they thought it through again, Rondo still could not let his children see what was going to happen to them in the next few seconds. Only the old man saw it, too late, and his Maiwe e Zvanger did not register on the children's mind. Or so Rondo wanted to think. He could not bear to imagine what could have gone through his children's mind if they had seen it coming towards them. Probably, it is just possible that they did see it, but could not understand what it meant. It is also possible that they might even have cheered the behemoth coming towards them, towering above them. The sight of it moving inexorably, so Rondo wanted to think, might just have made them aware of its destiny. So, after all, they just might have died happily, or, at least, obviously. Rondo was trying to erase the pain, trying to come to terms with it as it coursed through him again and again. He was sitting on the same sofa he had sat on for the past week, chin locked in the heart-shaped cup of his hands. He had only left the sofa at the insistence of his workmate Gaston, who, under the pretext of buying groceries for the mourners, was really trying to take Rondo's mind off things a bit. For the whole week he had been hearing the low, continuous buzz of murmuring voices, broken now and again by the keening and wailing of some female new arrivals, as the mourners came in and went out of the tent, sitting with them, the bereaved family, or leaving to attend some urgent personal business, but always coming back again later to keep them company, to mourn with them. Of course, Rondo was not aware that all these people came for different reasons, some out of the genuine awareness of neighborly goodwill, some out of respect, and some, well, you could see it in the way they stared into the cameras as they shook hands with the old man, the ex-minister, Rondo's father. These photos would open doors in future. People would be remembered. Rondo had seen the crowds smiling all over the place. He had heard their voices, low and consoling, but sometimes also loud and laughing, seemingly having forgotten why they were gathered at his house. These loud voices seemed more honest than the low ones. And when he heard all the voices as one, a strong hushed roar, wild beast on a rampage, a distant river in flood. Only it was July, height of the cold, dry season. Some voices had found lodging in his mind, and he had heard and understood that they were talking of what had happened in his home. It was not natural, they were saying. And then there were the songs. The haunting songs that the women had sung all night, every night, throughout the whole week, and that were now echoing back to him as he sat there across the fire from his father. They sat like that for some time in silence. Rondo started, as if waking from a deep sleep. He was certain that something had roused him, touched him physically, but he could not immediately tell what it was. He looked up. He turned his head right and left. He was surprised to find that his father was now sitting beside him on the sofa. The thought that his father had changed places without him being aware of it scared him. He also noticed that his father's hand was resting on his knee. Despite the fire and the general warmth in the seat, Rondo felt the coldness of that hand through the thick material of his jeans, as if shards of ice had been deposited on his flesh. Your grief will pass away like dew in the morning sun. One day you'll be grateful, glad that this happened now and not later. You'll remember me and thank me. Why, Father? Rondo's mind was elsewhere. His voice sounded strange to him. They were not talking about the same thing. You'll hear people talking. They'll try to give you all sorts of advice. It is lies. Don't listen to them, his father was saying. But Rondo found himself straining his ears, only to hear a silence settling down inside him, heavy as a huge stone, in that space which his children's voices would have filled. He felt his father's fingernails digging into the flesh of his knee, as if he were trying to make him understand something that he could not say in words. Rondo's eyes fixed on his father's. He saw, in the old man's eyes, the glow of the dying fire. A little flame flared up, flickered and died. Slowly, almost contemptuously, Rondo removed his father's hand from his knee. His father's eyes opened a little wider in surprise. Then quickly, he gave a little sad laugh. Nothing lives forever. You're still young. You can have other children. Without another word, the old man rose and shuffled towards the house. Rondo heard his coughing horribly. Then the cough was abruptly cut off as the door to the main building banged shut behind him. As his father entered the lit area in the veranda, Rondo had thought his shoulders looked narrower and droopier than he had remembered them. With more intensity, the thought which he had begun to visit him with almost daily frequency since the accident came once more. I must have been afraid of just a shadow. His wife, Selina, might have been right after all. To admit that she might have been right, that she could possibly be right, that not a pleasant thought for him to entertain. You're always in the shadow of your father. She had even gone as far as saying, I could do better in your pants. In the shadow of my father, he reflected again. As his thoughts grew dearer, exactly what am I doing to myself? His mind moved on to his colleagues in the journalistic fraternity and their attitude towards him. While they did not exactly laugh at him to his face, they certainly did not take him seriously. They might have wanted to, but Rondo was one of those people who, at any gathering, inadvertently became a laughingstock. And the worst of it was that Rondo, feeling defenseless, would join in the laughter as if to say, well, if you see me as a fool, I'll be one. In short, everyone seems to be telling Rondo to grow up, get a life. And yet, that was the scrape and squeak of a door opening. Rondo looked up and back at the house, silhouetted in the doorway with the light behind her, so that he could not see her face, stood his wife, Selina. They looked at each other like that for a long moment, and then Rondo turned his gaze back into the fire. He realized he was expecting to hear again the squeak and scrape of the door to tell him that his wife had gone back into the house. He did not feel he could enjoy company at the moment. Then he heard the snap of a twig very close to him, and he looked around. It was Selina. He restrained himself from shouting at her, which would have surprised her. He had not heard her footsteps as she approached him across the thick lawn. This thought, combined with the earlier one of his father changing places, alarmed him as he realized that possibly, of many things to do with his life and death, that were happening to him without his being aware of them. But this thought quickly melted away when he felt, gratefully, the warmth of Selina's hand on his frozen shoulder. He could smell the wool of the blankets she had risen from, resin sleep still lingering on her. Without looking at her, he raised his hand and laid it on top of hers on his shoulder. Then, her fingers cracking as he squeezed them in his, he was trying to say something to her that couldn't be said by word of mouth, and also trying to get from her something which was more than body warmth. He let his head rest against her belly, his skull just nudging the underside of her breast. "You have not slept a wink for the last week," Selina said in a very low voice as she crouched by the fire, knocking several pieces of wood together into a blaze. "I feel as if I've been asleep all my life," he said, at the same time wondering whether she understood what that meant. He sank his fingers into her dreadlocks. "I finally managed to sleep last night, thanks to your mother." Selina was silent for a moment. Then she went on. "All night, every day. We sat side by side. Then last night, I suppose she saw me noodling off and she just took my head and put it on her lap. I had not realized how exhausted I was, and how I needed a mother to hold me just like that." Another silence. Then, unexpectedly, "Great woman, your mother." Because he was thankful or confused, Rondo said, "And my father?" Selina tensed. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing." No, he was, as always, on the defensive. Of course, he did not mean nothing. What he really wanted to know was what his wife really thought about his father. So far, she hadn't said anything at all about anything, not since the accident in which her own father, and there, his and her own children had perished. It exasperated him that she always seemed to hold herself above everybody else, as if passing judgment on them and him, weaker mortals. Subconsciously, what irked him was that she had not said anything, good, bad, or indifferent, nothing that would at least indicate a direction for him to take. Although he might not have known it throughout their life together, he now seemed to have an inkling that she had always made all the decisions, a fact which had been quickly commented and acted on by his father. Now, he was to handle his father largely depended on what she, Selina, said about the old man. But now she was behaving as if she, Rondo wondered if she knew. He could never tell his wife, or possibly his own mother could have told her. They were inseparable, his wife and his mother. The two of them also knew how to get information. Rondo had always been surprised. He would burst into his or his mother's house with what he thought was something neither of them would have had. But the thing about them was that they would not embarrass you by letting you know the news was old hat. They would look kindly at you, and from that look you'd know that they had been hiding the information from you for the past month, or even a year. They preferred not to offer news. "Very strange," Rondo said to Selina. "What? This accident?" Selina stiffened. Then she turned her head slowly away from the fire and looked at him. She stood up, took both his hands in hers, and gently pulled him up. "Come on, you need rest. Let's get you some sleep, and then I'll prepare you a big breakfast. I can't remember when I last cooked you something since we started employing a housemaid. Come on, I don't want you to lose. I don't want to lose you as well." "Lose me?" "To the maid." But she suddenly let go of his hand as if she had remembered something else she would rather forget. She put her face into his hands and gave one big heave of the shoulders. Rondo put his arm around those shoulders. "I think I'll accompany Papa's body to Bulawayo tomorrow," she sighed after she had stopped crying. "We will go together." "No." "Why are you blaming?" "No, no, no." She did not quite scream, but she put her hand to Rondo's mouth and then rushed off across the lawn and into the house, crashing the door shut behind her. He looked after her at the closed door, feeling the way she had gone. She had realized she had been about to say something, he thought, something that hurt only him, but would later filter out to those near him. She was always telling him that he apologized too much. It was a form of selfishness, she said. But he had been brought up in a different world. She had been brought up by people with long hearts, people who forgave others. All these he understood now. And Rono remembered telling Selena about his first disappointment and the first summon from his father, who was then, he did not know in those days of political troubles, but of course his mother knew. Anyway, an uncle had given Rondo an old guitar. He was only 4 then. His father had come home in Old Canaan, Highfield, then, and found him strumming away tunelessly on the instrument. His father had broken the strings and thrown the whole contraption into the fire, saying, "No Mick Jaggers or John Whites in my house. Scum. They have no sense of responsibility, those people. Flowers of the sun, playing and singing on trains with no destination in mind. Railway followers. Rolling Stones. No son of Rafa has ever been a Rolling Stone." He had been only a child and did not have any idea who Mick Jagger or John Whites were, but he had remembered the fear that had been planted in him then. He had peered into his shorts. He had told Selena. So he had peed in his shorts. He had told Selena. And he had told her all this because he loved her, and he was about to lose her because his father, a full-blown Boom Kwan Shansu, was not left in Rafa family. He demeaned by an effeminate son who wanted to marry into ignominious Musviti family, and he would have lost her if she had not stood by him. She, her father, and his own mother, the flames of that burning guitar that had gutted all the courage out of him. It had always brought tears to his eyes to see his mother and wife together, while his father frowned and even spat at the relationship. And throughout, Rondo did not know what was behind all this tension in the relationships. Once his mother tried to simplify it for him. "Your father is Zezuru Karanga, and once upon a time they were raided by Madzviti in the Bele. Well, in those days, or even in those days, if you were a war, you were a war. It does bad things to people's minds, so they will always remember the pain of the scars rather than the relief of the healing. Your father, Mwanangu, is one bombed out battlefield of scars, and his deepest scars is that he cannot forgive not just his enemies, you, me, anyone." It had not meant anything to him then, but it had been easier to accept than, "Well, my son, give me a grandson to whom I can leave all these wars," Rondo thought. His cars, his houses and money, and his charisma, because though he might have been afraid of him, Rondo really thought his father, his daddy, was the greatest. In his nightmares, Rondo would have done anything for him. But after the ignominy of marrying a Mondevere, there was the further ignominy of having a granddaughter with Ndevere blood as first in the family, and then a second granddaughter. After this, there was nothing that could have appeased Mr. Ruafa, the ex-minister, Rondo's father. It was as if his son Rondo had been written out, written off, disappeared. But the problem was that Rondo was the only son and the only child. As an only son, a lot of things were done for Rondo by his father, of which the young man was not aware. And because he was not aware, he did not show his father enough gratitude or respect. Rondo's father was, therefore, a very disappointed man. At times so disappointed that his wife had to do a lot of humiliating things to cool him down. She might have enjoyed their affluence as one of the members of the small ruling elite in a newly independent government, but Mrs. Rofa had very deep fears about the future of her only son. His father loved him so much, he was prepared to destroy his son in his endeavor to have a duplicate, an heir. Mr. Rofa, as Minister of Security, seemed to have pursued his duties so zealously that he had not been able to distinguish party from family. And people had suffered, especially Rondo, to the extent that never through his life had he been able to answer any one of his father's questions. He had developed a stammer. His mother could have told him that lots of people developed a stammer whenever his father asked them questions. It had taken Rondo a very long time to realize that his father's job was, although he knew that he was somewhere high up there, and Rondo's mother was caught in between the sensitivity of her husband's job and the sensitivity of her son's nature. In a way, each of them lived locked in their separate cages. Rondo always thought that his father must be right. He was too diminished to think otherwise, and he was afraid for his mother whenever she had to oppose the old man he loved, or though he loved his father, but the topic was too sacred to consider deeply. Maybe he loved him because he always did everything for him. His mother did a lot too. The more intimate things like underwear and peanut butter, but his father was out and out there with Batman and Superman, yet he could not tell in exactly what sense. And Selina? It seemed the first time she came into their house, she had understood the whole situation. Rondo's father had asked, who were her people? And the moment Rondo told him, his father had walked out. He had stayed out of sight for the whole day, yet Selina told him it was the most enjoyable day she had ever had in her life. From day one, Selina had, so it seemed to Rondo, taken to his mother like her own, or like an old friend. Rondo loves both his mother and his wife, but now he was wondering whether they, too, are not laughing at him like his colleagues at work. Rondo Rofa knows very well that he is not a brilliant journalist. In fact, he could not even remember how the job had come about. One morning, his father came to his room and said, "Slob, wake up. Time you earned your own keep." Slob, his father's language exactly. None of the words he used to address Rondo had any respect in them. It seemed that there would not even be anything that his son could ever get right. And Rondo suspected that in her less I love you moment, Selina saw him in the same light, less than me. Only his mother seemed to see him as a whole. So Rondo had found himself at the Clarion, the city's daily paper, among people who seemed to start laughing at him the moment they set eyes on him, yet they held him in some kind of awe. He had been presented to the office by none other than Rofa himself. They flocked around him. They asked for favors, which, of course, they got, although at times it meant a few uncomfortable minutes in his father's office at home. Yes, his colleagues laughed at him, he knew, but no, he did not know. Could it be malicious? He gave them money, advances, at the thin time of the month, and not a few had used his name to get something or other form of finance houses, credit stores, legal firms, and so on. But was it possible that all the time they had been laughing at him? Recent events were driving Rondo's thoughts down avenues he had not accustomed to. More than mere recent events were making Rondo see something else in events that he had always taken for granted. Of his workmates, Rondo could say Gaston Charcot was the closest to him, although not quite a friend. Gaston was not very popular with the rest of the fraternity because he behaved as if he knew all the answers. Maybe because of this, he saw the company of Rondo as the lesser of the two evils. Anyway, Gaston loved to talk and drink, and Rondo had lots of money and a girlless face. A long time back, Gaston had asked Rondo, "Do you know what your father does?" Rondo had shrugged the question off. A second or another time, Gaston had asked again, "Have you ever wondered about the Second Street accidents?" And again, Rondo had shrugged his shoulders. Do you even know what they are? Gaston asked. Now, what are they? Gaston had laughed. Rondo could always be a knave down. Rondo had laughed because he did not know and he did not think it mattered. Now, after this accident, thinking things over, Rondo had a better idea of what Gaston had often tried to tell him, and Gaston more than confirmed it when, on one of their several trips in the past week to buy food and firewood for the mourners, he said, "This is your story. It would be a betrayal if we wrote it up, since it involves a colleague." Silence. Then, looking at Rondo, he said slowly and conclusively, "This is a typical Second Street accident." Rondo stared at Gaston like a trapped animal. I felt terror in that moment, accepted that he had always refused to think about why his father left the house in the morning and what he did before he returned in the evenings, or the following week for that matter. Gaston observed his friend quietly. There would never have been a good moment. He put his hand on Rondo's shoulder. "You can't be a child forever, Rondo." They walked slowly to the car and drove back to Borrowdale in silence. Gaston stopped the vehicle. Rondo sat motionless in the passenger seat. His friend looked at him for a moment and said quietly, "We're home, Rondo." Then, as Gaston began unpacking the goods from the boat, he said, "In case you need it, there's a gun in the glove, Glaucus. It's loaded." Rondo had not been used to living his life from deductive or logical thinking, but now the accumulation of events and the history behind them had made him so numb. He was almost a zombie, and Gaston would not leave him alone. According to Gaston, the whole story had to be seen from the point of view of Rondo's father. What happened at the birthday party? Gaston had asked. Rondo could not see anything wrong with the party except that two old men, his father and his father-in-law, had made speeches that seemed to have turned sour. His mind seemed at times to have an amazing way of getting rid of the details of an experience. "No," Gaston had said. "Only one old man made a speech, and that broke up the party, didn't it, Rondo? Don't you remember that?" And Rondo remembered. He even remembered other incidents that Gaston did not know anything about. Rondo recalled what had happened at the birthday party, but a day before the party, there had been a quarrel, a misunderstanding between his father and her father-in-law. There had always been a tension between the two, but the episode of the party had rendered it dramatic. Although he thought he loved his own father, Rondo had always sensed that if he had to choose, he would pick out his father-in-law as his father. It was just a feeling, not defined, not absolute. Nothing about his father-in-law demeanor showed that he was a very successful businessman and the MP of a constituency in North Matabeleland. When he was with his father-in-law, Rondo always felt the space around him had expanded. He did not know exactly how to put it, but he felt he could and he would be allowed to do anything he wanted. Only on very rare occasions had Mr. Mzamani mentioned his difference with Rondo's father, and even then he would conclude, of course, he is free to think as he likes. So at one point in their married life, Selena suggested that they invite every relative and friend for a joint birthday celebration for their daughters, Yuna 6, Rhoda 5. Mr. Mzamani had married again after Selena's mother had died, and Selena did not yet feel comfortable with her stepmother. So, in the invitation to her father, she had alluded to this. She knew that her father would understand, and he did. He came alone. He also came a few days before the celebration, as he had business to conduct in Harare. Mr. Ruafa, surprisingly, drove to Randa's home to see Mr. Mzamani on the morning after his arrival. He seemed quite cheerful, which was almost very unusual in Rondo and Selena's house, but more especially in the presence of Basil Mzamani. Not least because the bill for the couple's wedding celebration had been met by Mr. Mzamani. The larger part of the expense anyway. Rondo's mother had helped too, in tears at times, because her husband had told her, "Who did you say is wedding?" and had conveniently left town on state business for 2 weeks. Selena could not believe that this was just a courtesy call, a friendly gesture towards her father. However, the ostensible purpose of this surprising visit was not kept secret for long. As with other key high-ranking officials in the ruling party, Rondo's father had his eye on a certain farm in Rua area, which was presently owned by a white man, Mr. Kwaile. Rondo had driven to the farm on several occasions because he had a natural love for the outdoors, the trees, the hills, the open vistas. On the first occasion, he had gone out to the farm with his father. Subsequently, Selina had accompanied him. She seemed to like the Curleys too. Indeed, they seemed very nice people. Each time he visited the farm, they presented him with some of their farm produce, milk, honey, apples, whatever was in season. They had to force the bounty on him since he was too shy and embarrassed to receive gifts from people. Rondo learned from Mr. Kwale that the relationship between him and his father went back years. When we worked together in a bookshop in town, but it's now mostly sustained by our passion for duck shooting. Rondo had not bothered to find out more from his father about this relationship. He did not even speculate on the possibility that it would go beyond just duck shooting. Every shot duck, Mr. Mzamani, Rondo's father asked Rondo's father-in-law that day before the birthday celebration. No, why? Because I'd like to watch some duck shooting today. Say you can shoot it yourself. It would have been more fun. One can always learn, Mr. Mzamani said. Isn't it a bit late in the day for you? Mr. Basil Mzamani had laughed his uproarious laughter and said something that had made Rondo laugh as well. But Mr. Ruafa seemed to disapprove. He was a man who laughed little. They drove out towards Roa in Mr. Ruafa's Pajero. Rondo had wanted to sit alone in the back to give the two elderly men a chance to talk, some age-boy stuff, but Mr. Mzamani had declined to do so, saying, I suffer from vertigo. Rondo had to sit in front with his father, wondering why odd vertigo had to do with anything. At the Mavuku turnoff, they found an open truck parked by the roadside. It was full of youth singing Chimurenga songs and waving ugly-looking clubs. Some even had bows and arrows and spears. Immediately they passed the truck, it fell in, right behind their own car. You duck shooting posse? Mr. Mzamani asked. Rondo laughed. He had not thought about it at all. Damn right, Mr. Ruafa replied, and Rondo stopped laughing at the chilly tone of the father's voice. They must be pretty good marksmen to hit flying ducks with those clubs. Not at all. We hunt sitting ducks. Mr. Mzamani gave another of his uproarious laugh, saying, This is pretty good. I must tell this to Radebe. There was no more talk in the car, but looking behind him, Rondo wondered whether his father had not been telling the truth after all. The truck was still behind them. When they stopped for some drinks at Rua, it stopped some distance on the road ahead, and it fell in behind them again when they passed. As they turned off the main Mutare road to the farm, the truck also turned off. Now, tell me, is this just coincidence or what? Mr. Mzamani seemed a little dark with fear or just worry. Rondo's father did not bother to answer. Rondo did not even think that there might be something ominous about the truck trailing them behind with a load of club-wielding, slogan-chanting youths. He was preoccupied by the sudden beauty of the land they were driving through. He did, however, wonder briefly whether the boys in the truck saw the same thing that he saw in the countryside. If they saw anything, their minds probably would not register it or were fermenting with the thoughts of what they were going to do wherever they were going. As they drew closer to the farm, the singing, chanting almost grew louder, more intense, menacing. It was no longer just ordinary singing. There was something elemental in it. The naked and ashamed raw lust for blood. Not that Rondo did not like singing. He had been brought up on these songs. Although in peace times, the words would be different. And he found himself wishing that the youths were using peaceful words. Right now, right here where they were just leaving an area of bush, Musasa, Mutondo, Musasa, and an assortment of wild fruit trees. The coming into open of the valley towards the river. The land provided a breathtaking view of its immensity. Across the river lay some low granite hills with dark forest and mountains in the blue distance. It was just after midday, yet something affected the atmosphere so that the heat seemed subdued and the air acquired the dark color of old memories. Rondo thought, any moment Daika will disturb the tall grass and dash across the road, and not from a forgotten or unknown memory rather than a remembered reality. His nostrils were filled with the smell of fresh water. Soon they were rolling down the stream with very little water in its bed, and crossed a narrow concrete and stone bridge into a curb on a low hill. They kept on driving up, then round a bend on the road, almost a blind turn, and there they came upon a jeep stalled to the side of the road. Its hood was open and a white woman was bent under it, looking into the engine. She looked up as Rondo and company came and noiselessly halted beside her car. The lorry with the chanting youths pulled up behind Mr. Rofa's car. The woman stood frozen. Her dirty hands gripped a greasy spanner. There was a moment of silence as the woman looked at the man in both vehicles, and the man looked back at her. For a few painful moments, neither seemed to know what to do with the other. Then the woman brought down the hood of the jeep with a loud bang, moved quickly to the open door of the jeep, reached in, pulled out a rifle. The youth in the truck jumped out at the moment and advanced towards her. Rondo had not heard the sound of the door open nor Mr. Mzamani getting out, but suddenly there he was, standing with his hands raised, the woman behind him and the mob before him. They all froze. Mr. Mzamani spoke in a calm, fatherly note. Let us all remember we are human. This lady probably needs our help. Even so, if there is something you had planned to do, I don't want to be a witness to it, because I'm not part of your plans. I'm a stranger to this part of the country. Is this how you treat visitors in your homes? Would you like me to tell people where I come from that this is how you treat people here? There was a stunned silence, a light tremor of knockberries being lowered by a degree or two. Then an impassioned voice rang. Chef, who is this man? All eyes turned on the young man. That was when Rondo realized his father had sneaked out of the car and disappeared. Quickly, Mr. Mzamani assessed the situation and said, You see, he gave me word that today is cancelled. Go home. He's going to contact you. I'm his Bulawayo comrade. We are in the same work, same rank. For no reason that Rondo could see at all, the men lowered their clubs and got back onto the truck grumbling. They drove off. Thank you, the woman said, but she continued to clutch her rifle. And that was when Rondo recognized her. What seems to be the trouble with the car? Mr. Mzamani asked. It just ceased. Rondo felt that he should have done something to help, and because he had not, he kept his head very low out of embarrassment. Mr. Mzamani opened the hood of the jeep and fiddled with the engine and said, Try here, let's see. The car started on the first kick. The woman thanked Mr. Mzamani profusely. She gave him her name. Mr. Mzamani said it did not matter. She asked if they had time so they could drive to the farm. It was not far, for a cup of tea. Mr. Mzamani joked, saying that they had to hurry to catch up with the singing boys in the truck before they got up to some other mischief. The woman thanked him again and said that in future he was in the area, he should drop in for a cup of tea, or he should make an appointment with her husband for duck shooting. She gave a small laugh, thanked him again, and drove off. Less than 2 minutes after the woman had driven off, Rondo's father appeared from behind a bush. He did not say a thing, got behind the wheel, and they drove back the way they had come. About 30 minutes of total silence in the car seemed unbearable for Rondo. Also, he felt terribly oppressed and morally bound to say that what was bothering him. One of those very rare occasions when fear of his father was less than pain inside him. That was Mrs. Cole back there, Rondo said. Is she your mother? His father snapped. Do you know her? Mr. Mzamani asked, Rondo looking furtively at his father. Mr. Rafa concentrated on his driving. I'm asking you, Mr. Mzamani said. You often drive to the farm. Father sometimes traitor. Mr. Rafa spat the word out under his breath. Shoot ducks with Mr. Quayle? Mr. Mzamani offered, laughing. Nothing to worry about, Rondo. They, or at least she seemed to be a good neighbor. You had her invite me to tea. I'm sure you too have had tea with her or them. When neither Rondo nor his father answered, Mr. Mzamani told Rondo that he had to grow up and see people as they were, as individuals. He talked of how some are good and some are bad, and how sad it was that the majority of people seemed keen on seeing only the bad in people. He told the story of a white farmer in Manhinze Mountains who was, well, not exactly a spirit medium, but who believed in Vadzimu. Whether he believed or not, Mr. Mzamani said, was not the point, but it seemed to help his prospects. The story behind the story is that his grandfather settled in the area of the Pauzo people, thus taking possession of their sacred pool, Kapa. Not only did the sacred pool come under his farm, the ancestral graves, the forest, the beehives, everything that had given the Pauzo sustenance was on his farm. Well, might is right, a fact of life. But 3 years after Kakuyu, there is a name the locals gave his settler. 3 years after settling on the farm, he could not prosper. Every year several herds of cattle died, and of an unknown disease, baboons, wild pigs, and birds played havoc with his grain crops. He was thinking of selling the farm and calling it quits when the headman of the Pauzo people told him what to do. You see, although Kakuyu now owned what had been these people's ancient land, he allowed them to make use of the local pool and pray to their ancestors. So the headman thought, why not help him as well? So he asked him to buy the rasta, the black and white cloth of Vazimu. He told him what to do with it every morning at the sacred pool. He told him the words to say, and that he had to leave a handful of grain from the land. The man had a bumper harvest the following season. Only one cow died, and that could easily have been from old age. The man was the grandfather of the farm's present owner. Pauzo enter and leave the farm as they like, to attend the graves of their ancestors, pray to Kapa, set up beehives, mouse traps, bat traps, termite traps. Shut up, traitor, Mr. Rofa shouted, his voice icy, and he rammed his foot on the brakes at the Pajero. There's more to the story than if you respect me. Then he started the car and they drove off again. Rondo would not have tried to see what lay behind this incident if Gaston had not asked him to remember what happened at the birthday party. And what had happened at the party? It had turned out to be a great party, at least at the beginning. No one paid attention at first to the two elderly men, the politicians, who were quite conspicuous by their keeping as far apart as possible. If you did not know the score or did not look closely, you'd not notice the tension behind their tight smiles and loud laughs as they seemed to compete in entertaining the groups of children and young parents that had formed and dissolved around them. Basil Mzamani could have won the contest easily if he had not been too aware of being away from home. At one point, Mr. Rofa managed to raise some eyebrows when he referred to Mr. Mzamani as the Honorable MP. There seemed, at least to an innocent ear, no innuendo of sarcasm or irony in his voice. A number of people were so moved that they observed a few seconds of silence. It was an unusual admission from Mr. Rofa, and it revealed a rare chink in his armor. People thought. There was a noticeable relaxation all around after this. Selina and Rondo even allowed themselves to think that this was what they had wanted all along. A moment like this with their parents, all their parents. Selina felt the party had served its purpose. But then, out of the blues, someone, Rondo could not later remember who it was, probably one of the dreadlocked crop of reporters, said, "Mr. Minister," they still called Mr. Rofa Mr. Minister, in reference to his past glory and, well, his age. "Why don't you tell the children a story, sir?" "Yes," another one shouted. "We haven't heard you tell us about what you did in the liberation struggle." Someone should have really had stopped the whole thing at this point, but nobody did. And Rondo later remembered having the feeling that he used to have as a boy, when he embarked on something that he knew he was not allowed to do, and yet very thought that it was not allowed fueled his action. It was quite a peaceful scene, the children chasing each other and screaming and squirting water into each other's faces and firing crackers. Rondo, his friends minding the braai, standing around and joking, glasses of beer in hand, and the women in their own corner of the garden. It looked as if nothing could possibly disturb the equilibrium of things. But then someone had asked that question, and already it was too late to do anything about it, when Mr. Rofa raised his voice and said, "Are you sure you really want to hear about that?" "Yes," quite a number of voices shouted back. No one noticed Basil Mzamani wandering quietly away, pretending to be admiring the plants in Rondo's garden. Mr. Rofa made all the children sit cross-legged at his feet. Rondo and his friends made themselves comfortable in sofas, legs crossed, beers in hand, forming a protective out circle around the children. Mr. Rofa talked of betrayals. He talked of traditional enemies of people since the time immemorial. Enemies of the state, enemies of the clan, of the family, looters and cattle thieves, personal enemies, people who spat in the face of their own people, child thieves, baby snatchers. He talked of his waking up to his mission. He talked without any shame of his personal prowess, of his achievements, the obstacles he had overcome to get where he was. The obstacles were nothing, he said. The main thing for them to remember was that no son of Rafa family would ever play second fiddle to anyone's lead. Rafa's place is always up there, at the top, out there, right in front of the crowd. No one who carries Rafa's blood should carry anybody's peace spot. He raved on, foam flecking the corners of his mouth, his eyes an incandescent red. His voice rose higher, hurt, terribly, terribly hurt by effeminate, spineless sons of families who marry into the families of their enemies, poisoning the poor blood of the Rafa clan. Rondo could not look at his father. Guests started leaving, silently, one after the other, grabbing their children by the hand and hurrying them to their cars where they summoned their wives. Rondo was rooted to his seat, an untouched drink in his hand, unable to look up or to wave goodbye to his father, as his father carried on and on like one possessed. At some point, his father had rapped the ground so hard with his favorite hardwood walking stick that it snapped cleanly into two. His father looked at the broken ornament stick, a gift from admirers in Mozambique, as if it were the death of a well-loved heir and only child. He had wiped bitter sweat off his brow. Rondo listened to his father, sensing that something terrible was happening, or had already happened, but unable to tell exactly what. Everybody had gone, and only he and his children remained. Rondo looked at the children, 6 and 5 years old. He looked at their open-mouthed, wide-eyed innocence as the old man rumbled on. They need to be smoked out, flushed out, blasted out of their hiding places. The imposters. Remember all this? Rondo had been reminded of another incident that he had almost forgotten. He wondered how he could have done so. It was the day he had helped himself to some ripe mangoes from the neighbor's garden. He had not seen anything wrong in that, but the neighbor had come upon him, pulled him down by the leg and given him a thorough thrashing with a green peach switch. And when his mother had him howling, she had come running out, lifted her skirt, the faced man. She called him a child murderer. The man went on shouting, "Ho!" and called Rondo, woman's child. And then his father had come into the neighbor's yard with his thick elephant hide belt, and without even bothering to find out what the matter was, proceeded to thrash Rondo. Even after all these years, the sight of his mother dragging herself on her knee from one man to the other, back and forth, begging them, clapping her hands to spare her only son, her only child, that alone gave him a very uncomfortable feeling, and he just did not want to remember. He had never told anyone about it, not even his wife. At that early age, he was only 8, although he did not have the words. He must have understood what powerlessness meant. Yet his mother had always insisted, "Your father really loves you. He just doesn't know how to show it." It was that same feeling at the birthday party, Rondo remembered. After the party, things could not be expected to remain the same. There was a tension in the air. Mr. Mzamani tried to joke a bit, but gave it up, saying he had to sleep early for a long drive to Bulawayo the following day. That was when he had asked if Rondo and Selina could let his 2 beautiful granddaughters accompany him. It had been a long time since he had given them a real treat. Rondo and Selina had said they saw nothing wrong with that. But Rondo also remembered a seemingly insignificant thing had happened soon after they had given their consent. Rondo's mother had asked, "Did any one of you see where my husband went?" People had laughed. Remembering it later, Rondo was not sure that this should have been ignored. Rondo stood up from the fire in the marquee and walked to the guest room that his father had been using throughout the week. He did not knock. He found his father reading a magazine, sitting on a sofa. "What took you so long?" his father asked without taking his eyes off the paper. Rondo did not answer. He pulled a folded piece of paper out of his pocket and handed it to his father. After reading it, his father looked up and said, "Did you ask one of your more intelligent friends to write this for you?" Rondo did not answer. It was all he could do, stand there unblinkingly. His father had not asked him to sit down. "I wouldn't have believed that you had it in you." His father laughed harshly, but his laughter caught in his throat when a gun appeared in Rondo's hand. But something was wrong. Rondo had the butt of the gun pointing at his father, as if he was offering it to him. His father's eyes opened wider. Still a great flood of sadness washed through him. He looked wearily into the face of his one and only son. He searched all over his face for a forthood of manhood, for a handhold of hope. "So the whole thing is your idea, then?" He took the gun out of Rondo's hand and pointed it at his head. Rondo could have been a rock for all that he felt. It was not courage, just numbness, stupidity, his workmates or friends would have said. He understood then now. Somewhere inside him, a deep wish emerged that his father should shoot him. That would simplify matters. He would be taking care of things as he had always taken care of the things of his life. "I haven't used a gun before," Rondo said calmly. "I thought you'd do this thing better than me. After all, this is the story of your life." Slowly, his father put the gun on the floor, reached inside his jacket and took out his own service pistol. Rondo watched all this as if it were happening on the screen. Then, unexpectedly, his father hissed, "You two get out of here and shut the door." Rondo obeyed, and as he turned, he saw Selena in the doorway with a gun. She did not resist when Rondo pushed her out gently, closing the door softly behind them. The sound came a soft, muffled plop, but Rondo was looking at the gun in Selena's hand. She read his thoughts and said, "Your mother gave it to me." Rondo bent his head in silence.